Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. The Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bloomberg Businessweek Weekend Podcast. Another busy week that started with the unrest in California over the Trump administration's immigration policies and closed with progress on trade between the United States and two of its major trading partners.
We also spent time at Cisco Live 2025 in San Diego. We're going to share some of our favorite conversations from the conference.
There was a lot of good ones. We're going to start, though, this hour with trade. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer were in London early this past week, negotiating with officials from China in the hopes of making a major trade breakthrough.
The talks lasted around 20 hours, taking up all day Monday and most of the day on Tuesday, before wrapping up late that night.
Yeah, it felt like they just kept pushing on and pushing on and pushing on. We finally did hear from Secretary Lutnick and Trade Representative Greer, who finally stepped outside close to midnight in London Tuesday and talked to reporters about the high-stakes negotiations and how the group finally agreed on a plan to move forward. Here's the U.S. Commerce Secretary.
First, we had to get sort of the negativity out, and now we can go forward to try to do positive trade, growing trade, and beneficial to both China and to the United States of America.
That's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, just moments after leading trade negotiations in London with Chinese officials.
The framework the two sides agreed upon is based around a consensus from meetings in Geneva held last month that first lowered tariffs between the two countries. At the core of the talks, highly coveted rare earth minerals.
As negotiations were going on, we wanted to touch base with an expert on these materials and why they're at the center of talks between the U.S. and China. We caught up with Gracelyn Baskrin, director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She helped explain why rare earths are so important.
First and foremost, rare earths are in everything. And we've seen that in the last couple of weeks as companies have not been able to secure the licenses they need. We have seen disruptions to manufacturing. We've seen it most visibly from the automotive sector. For example, Ford actually paused the manufacturing of its Explorer in Chicago because it didn't have these rare earths. But we have to remember they're in defense technologies, they're in cancer treatment, they're in MRI scanners, they're in just about everything electronic. So what we have is both this huge reliance, and really there's no significant processing capabilities that exist operational today, which means that we are wholly dependent on China for something that we need a lot of.
Gracelyn, Carol and I spoke to RJ Scaringe, the CEO of Rivian, the EV maker, and we asked him specifically about rare earths. And partly what he said, and he's been clear that he is working to lobby the Trump administration. His folks are communicating with them about the importance of rare earths. But he also told us, hey, necessity is essentially the mother of invention. And I'm confident that we're going to be able to do some of this stuff, at least in the near future, without rare earths. Do you think that's the case? Are we going to be able, from a technological standpoint, not to have to rely on rare earths for some of these things?
We are going to reduce our reliance. I mean, never underestimate the power of American innovation. We created a vaccine for a virus that we didn't know anything about a year and a half prior to that. So we will absolutely see, I think, a reduction in our reliance on them, number one, in terms of how much we need them. We're starting to create engines without them. However, that is a process. The second thing we're going to start to see is more capabilities come online outside of China. We saw, for example, that Linus is now starting to produce small scale at its facility in Malaysia. The U.S. is kind of trying to warp speed our own facilities in California and Texas. So innovation is going to be a huge part of reducing our reliance and increasing our capabilities.
All right, but how quickly does all that happen? Because I think the other thing we followed up with him, RJ Scaringe, is that none of this is going to happen overnight, right? So how long does it take to kind of make the switch? And then in the meantime, how much are we still reliant on China, or how long will we probably be reliant on China?
I mean, we're going to be relying on China at some level, in my opinion. And I know opinions vary on this for probably a few years in terms of being able to meet all of our capabilities. We have to remember this isn't just a problem of capital. In December 2023, China actually banned the export of processing technologies. And there were parts of the supply chain we actually realized we didn't even have the technical know-how in terms of how to do those midstream. So one is building the technical know-how, and that takes a bit of time. It's expensive. So realistically, even if we start to be able to get offtake by the end of the year through domestic capabilities and potentially through non-Chinese foreign sources, before we are comfortably reliant on non-Chinese capabilities for probably a few years.
Gracelyn, how much of this is an environmental story? To what extent is the processing of rare earths something that's done in China because other countries didn't want to deal with the environmental consequences of this?
The environment is no doubt one of the challenges that has limited other countries from developing the capabilities. You know, we use the term NIMBY, not in my backyard, because sometimes we don't want these things in our backyard, and we're very happy for them to be done far away. So that was certainly one component. The second thing I want to add to the environment component is generally the United States has deprioritized mining over the better part of several decades. Between the 1950s and the 1990s, the U.S. was actually the top rare earth producer in the world. We were the top uranium producer in the world. We had a Bureau of Mines that was responsible in government for coordinating all of our mining activities. We closed that in 1996. We ceded a lot of our advantages to China and Russia during this time, and that's how they really created a dominant position where the U.S. once was. So the environmental challenges certainly slow down permitting and some of these other dimensions of mining, but we also have to remember there was a broader government deprioritization of the agenda, which is how we found ourselves where we are today.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Was it because the government wasn't prioritizing? Was it because companies, really concerned about the bottom line and profitability and making money that they said China can do it more cheaply and more easily for us? Is it because we didn't have the labor pool? Why was it that the U.S. went from being a leader to basically, now it's China as the leader when it comes to rare earth minerals?
So if this was a multiple choice exam, all of the above, I hope, would be one option. But there's a few things, right? So when the government deprioritizes something, it creates a negative signal. As a result of government deprioritizing it and a lot of this moving offshore to China, Russia, Australia over time, then mine engineering programs have less need to produce mine engineers and other skilled labor for mining operations. So we have a huge workforce shortage here in the United States. Along with that, again, it is much cheaper to do it in China, where there are low environmental standards, where labor is much cheaper. If you go to a mine in Montana, you're not going to have a worker making under $120,000.
Right.
We don't have to pay a worker in China that same amount. So basically, the overall production costs fell too.
That was Gracelyn Bascarin, director of the Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
We should point out after our conversation, Bloomberg News reporting that the Trump administration is developing a plan to use Cold War-era powers to prioritize and fund rare earth projects it deems critical to national security. And that is according to people familiar with the matter. You can check out the entire story, find it on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com. So while trade talks dominated the overall news cycle this past week, one top business story for us was about one of the world's largest market cap companies. And yes, it's definitely a household name.
Apple hosted its annual Worldwide Developers Conference in Cupertino, also known as WWDC. The company unveiled its biggest redesign of its operating system in years. It's called Liquid Glass.
Not a big surprise, since Bloomberg's Mark Gurman had reported a lot of the details in the weeks leading up to the conference. And gotta say, investors not too impressed as well, as they sent shares of Apple lower during the event's keynote.
For more on Apple's new look and what we learned at WWDC, we spoke with Bloomberg Technology co-host Ed Ludlow, who was at the conference in Cupertino.
You have to remember, this is Apple WWDC. It is a developers conference. A lot of what is announced is targeted at a group of people who are critically important in contributing to Apple's ecosystem. But it was almost kind of like a sell the news kind of event, both because a lot of what we heard Mark Gurman had already reported, we all know that, and also because, expectations that Apple at some point is going to give us a lot more on AI, those expectations weren't met clearly.
Hey, Ed, let's stick on the liquid glass portion of this. My question then and my question now, after it being unveiled, is there a learning curve here for consumers? We've seen mistakes that Apple's made in the past with redesigns. Apple Maps more than a decade ago certainly comes to mind there. But is this going to be a learning curve? Like, how different is this going to be as an experience? I mean, there are over 1 billion iOS users out there. They're going to have to get used to this.
Yes, but 1 billion iOS users, but you have to think about it in the aggregate of people that use a broader Apple ecosystem. So a lot of liquid glass's inspiration comes from the work that Apple had done with Vision Pro. You know, literally the UI and UX of that experience using Vision Pro, the translucency of it. And so by making it uniform, you know, having the same look across iPhone, Mac, iPad OS, and Vision Pro and Watch, you know, it just makes you more familiar and I guess open to using the full hardware suite of products, let alone the software suite of products. But again, like, this is a stock that's been driven by trade headline, trade risk, tariff risk. But it's a company who like will tell you time and time again that they're just focused on iteration, design, you know, executing on making things beautiful every year. And the problem is that last year, 2024, and indeed the year prior when they announced the Vision Pro, this event, the reason I'm here, all of us gathered at WWDC, there was much more of a clear, tangible news catalyst around it. This kind of goes back to what WWDC has always been, which has been for the people, the community that build for Apple, for the App Store, and for all of those devices.
Okay, and that's, I guess, part of the value of going to WWDC, right, Ed, is kind of talking to some of these developers, feeling the mood about what they are saying. So what are you hearing from them? These are the kind of insiders, right? So I'm just curious. Yeah.
We actually did get some AI news, and that piece of news was that Apple is going to open up its on-device LLMs, Apple's own work in proprietary models, to the developer community. The reason that that's a substantive piece of news is that's exactly how it works with OpenAI and Microsoft and Google and the Gemini teams. A lot of the success they've had in basically commercializing that technology is to say to developers, have at it. Here's the underlying model, use it to make whatever you want to do better. And that makes the iOS, as an example, more appealing. So that was a big step forward today. But to the outside of the investor community, all of us that are consumers that have iPhones, there wasn't something there for us in that respect. And what was so interesting is that sort of drop in the stock at the start of the keynote, it actually coincided with Craig Federighi, the services software chief, saying, we will have a lot more to talk about with Siri later. You know, because this had nothing to do with that, the way that one as a consumer interacts with their phone right now.
Later? How much later? I mean, are investors and members of the developer community still waiting for a Siri that is as smart as some of these virtual assistants that we've seen from LLMs at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you know, I'm here at WWDC, but I still was following what Gurman was putting in the blog in real time. And he made the point at the end that Craig was kind of at pains to point out this is what is new with Apple Intelligence. Here are all of the things that Apple Intelligence can do, rather than you're going to have to wait till later in the year to get more functionality out of it. On the other hand, like, one of the things we got today was live translation in the iMessage and call context, but also through AirPods, right? But I even get like a sense of deja vu, because when I was at Meta Connect last fall, you know, Mark Zuckerberg was there on stage with his Ray-Ban Metas demoing exactly the same thing. You know, the ability to live translate in a nation like America where many people are bilingual, it's awesome when you consider the number of people that use an iPhone and are on the iOS system or macOS or iPadOS. But it ain't that new, and all the other technology companies are doing it as well. And that's kind of the frustration. It's like, give me the all singing, all dancing version of Apple Intelligence, which we interact with through Siri principally. And that's the bit you're going to wait for. And I didn't answer your question, Tim, because they didn't say later in the year.
No,
that's it.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, look, it's a question that, you know, nobody really has an answer for, and maybe Apple doesn't even know at this point.
Well, wait, it's kind of like, hey, Siri, like, when are you going to get better?
Okay, let's not make everyone's phones freak out, Carol Massar. Hey, Ed, before we let you go, you've been to a lot of these events, and as you mentioned, this is one for the developer community, and Apple's App Store and what you can do on an Apple device would be nothing without the developer community. Yeah. Have you had a chance to hear from any developers, to speak to anybody who's attending this, and just get an understanding for what the vibes are in 2025 when it comes to the developer community?
So literally, we had a guy called Paul Hudson on the show earlier. He is the creator of hacking for Swift, Swift being the platform that many use to code for OS application and OS software. And kind of what we've gone over is exactly why he was excited that, when you build for one of the Apple operating systems, you usually use an Apple tool to do so. And he's, was pretty jazzed and excited. A lot of people look at Craig Federighi as like the man, the rock star, the silver fox of software. And on stage, they got what they were asking for to some sense, that like having on-device LLM access is huge for a lot of developers. It just makes their life in doing something easier. But the root of your question is the most important bit. We have the App Store today for a reason. It is attractive to consumers, and there are lots of apps there that are made by third-party developers. I'm trying to think of a great example that Apple didn't make and someone else did. But you get the idea, and that's why all of this kind of update today is tracked, because it adds value to the broader services and ecosystem offering that Apple has.
All right, basic metric. You've got Apple shares down 19% year to date. I look at something like Meta, it's actually up 19% year to date. So what is it that the investment community really wants to see from Apple to give it some love?
So I'm actually just pulling ChatGPT up on my phone because I was talking to ChatGPT about this earlier. Fewer than 60% of analysts rate Apple a buy, the lowest among its big tech peers. Apple's AI efforts are seen as safe by analysts. Reminder, it trades at 27 times earnings, which is slightly off its historic high. The point is so far this year, it hasn't traded. I know it's just so much fun to use this as a tool, inputting data from the Bloomberg. But so far this year, that 19%, it has nothing to do really with the AI story. As you guys know, it's tariff risk, the relationship with the administration and the President of the United States. But the risk going into today, and what was almost confirmed in the early minutes of that keynote, was, well, what if AI does become the key risk to the stock? Because investors lose patience and they say, we want to see something more tangible. It's a little unfair because I don't think we went into today thinking we would get anything like that. It was really clear what we were going to get. It was for the developer community, and we did get it.
Ed, we do have some extra time with you, which we're grateful for. And you're our guy in Cupertino. Great. We're keeping the seats warm for you here in the San Francisco studio. Liquid glass. One thing that Apple is trying to figure out, and I think it's fair to say every consumer tech company is trying to figure that out, is the form factor for the must-have device of the future. You've talked a lot about where Humane did not work. We've talked to you a lot about what we could see from Sam Altman and Johnny Ive.
Yes.
When it comes to what you saw with liquid glass, does it give any indication as to how Apple is thinking about this?
It does. Look, what Mark Gurman's reported is that the 17 generation of iPhone will have glass curve size with no sort of screen border, right? And liquid glass as a concept, the kind of translucency of it, the way that whatever's in the almost the foreground of your smartphone screen or iPad screen is not interrupted by what's popping up. We think that there will be some hardware iteration on that to come. But you do raise a really good point, which is why have liquid glass uniform across all devices? Because increasingly it's not the be all and end all, the thing that's in my right hand, a smartphone. It is that I take messages on my Apple Watch. Other smartwatches are available. I take, different platforms that I rely on OS for on my MacBook. Other laptops are available, etc. It's just a way of making it more uniform. So I think that there's definitely acknowledgement there. Whether the iPhone 17 has the features that Mark reported, we shall wait and see. But there was certainly a nod to that during the keynote, even if they didn't explicitly say, oh, by the way, the next version of the iPhone is definitely going to leverage this liquid glass concept.
Great stuff. Ed, thank you so much. We know, busy day, early day. Ed Ludlow, of course, co-host of Bloomberg Technology out there at Apple headquarters in Cupertino, California, of course, at the Worldwide Developers Conference.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
President Trump's immigration crackdown was definitely top of mind this past week. The administration's push to ramp up arrests and deportations led to protests springing up across L.A. and to other cities.
The big push for more arrests means there's a growing need for detention centers. And in several towns across the country, private facilities are picking up the slack.
It's interesting to consider that while some communities, including LA, are demonstrating how much they dislike the immigration policies, politicians and leaders in communities that have these private detention centers, some of them feel differently.
Bloomberg News investigations reporter Rachel Adams-Hurd was behind a big take on the budding deportation economy. She recently joined Carol and me to discuss what she learned about these so-called ICE towns. Welcome to America's ICE towns. These are communities convinced that their financial survival depends on locking people up. It's not a new phenomenon. In this iteration of the classic prison town, though, Carol, many of the people behind bars haven't been convicted of crimes.
Let's get to this Bloomberg Businessweek story. It is, I guess you could say, a slice of life in America, but not necessarily a good one. But let's get into it with Bloomberg News investigations reporter Rachel Adams-Hurd. She joins us from our Houston bureau. Rachel, good to have you here. What is an ICE town?
So an ICE town is a town where the local politicians, local community is convinced that they need these immigration detention facilities that operate under these lucrative contracts with ICE in order to be financially sound. A lot of these towns, they've had a private jail or private prison detention facility for decades. And with Obama-era sentencing reform, the federal prison population dropped off. And so to keep these facilities profitable, they signed contracts with ICE. And now we're seeing just a huge influx in the number of people detained at those facilities under the Trump administration's, mass deportation agenda.
So, Rachel, take us to one of these ICE towns, Torrance County, New Mexico.
Yeah, so we went to Torrance County, New Mexico at the end of March. That's when the county commission was voting to extend this contract. And it's a really rural community. It's one of those areas that used to be kind of this bustling hub thanks to the New Mexico Central Railroad. You had people from all over who would come through towns like Estancia, where this detention facility is located. But then Interstate 40 is built and commerce really just drops off. And so during the Reagan administration, when you're seeing these policies like the war on drugs that's massively expanding detention in America, there are these private prison companies that want to get a piece of that business. And New Mexico was a great place for that for them because land was cheap. They could build these really big detention facilities by the standards of the time. And so that's what happened in Estancia. CoreCivic, then Corrections Corporation of America, built a facility outside of town at the time. It's since been annexed into the town. And things were pretty good for a while. It employed people. The business was good for CoreCivic. But then around 2016, you had the federal prisoner population drop off. And that's when the facility ended up closing and CoreCivic said it was no longer profitable. And then ICE came in to basically save the day for CoreCivic and offered this contract that guaranteed revenue every single month, whether or not there were any ICE detainees in those beds. And that's the contract that allows the facility to operate today.
So just to set the record straight, I mean, these are facilities that have been around for a long time, different administrations, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the point is, too, though, that the conditions aren't great and they're needed in order to house kind of the roundup that is happening under this administration, correct?
So during the last 10 years, or I guess 5 years since this contract has been in place in Torrance County, a lot of the people that it was detaining on behalf of ICE, they were recent border crossers. These were people who were coming up the border from Mexico, a lot of times into Texas. They were seeking asylum, and while they were seeking asylum, they had, turned themselves over in a lot of cases, and now they were in ICE detention, being held at the Torrance County Detention Facility and Estancia. after Trump took office, you see a really dramatic fall off in the number of people crossing the border. And so all of a sudden you have room in the Torrance County detention facility. And so because you have this room, you're seeing ICE flying people from all over the country, a lot of them coming from New Jersey, from Florida, and they're flown into the Albuquerque airport and bused to the Torrance County detention facility. And that is where they're being held for months in a lot of cases. And this facility has had problems for the last several years, and it's really starting to kind of come to a head with the increase in the number of people that it's holding under the Trump administration.
Okay, well, you describe the facilities, at least one of them. What was it like? What is it like?
I mean, what we've heard from people who are currently being detained at the facility is that it's cold, the food is undercooked, inedible at times. We've heard complaints about access to medical care. There are a lot of people who say that they have tried to ask to be deported because they do not want to spend another day in ICE detention, but that it's incredibly difficult to get the attention of any ICE officers because it's all, prison staff, not necessarily anyone who can actually talk to them about their case. But the most dramatic issue that we've heard about recently had to do with the water supply. This is the desert. It's incredibly dry, and the town of Estancia was having an issue with one of its main water pumps. And so that led to water being intermittently shut off to the facility. We heard that there were toilets that were overflowing and that there was feces on the floor, that the smell was overwhelming. We heard people say that they had been limited at one point to 2 water bottles a day, that they were thirsty. At one point, the facility brought in trash cans full of waters to try to flush some of those toilets to deal with the odor and the hygiene issues. And someone we talked to said that he had seen people who were thirsty drink out of those trash cans because they were so desperate for water. So it sounds like this is improving over the last few days. We did hear that ICE was on the ground recently, but certainly it sounds like it has been a rough couple weeks inside the detention facility.
It's interesting because I'm thinking CoreCivic, right, which is the company that's been around and is running these facilities, right? I guess it's close to 4 decades, it looks like. I just remember that period in investing, private prisons. Everybody thought it was this great investment play. But you got to remember, it's people, it's humans. There are conditions. I am curious, are these people being held for due processing? Who determines the fate of these individuals? It's ultimately the federal government.
I mean, a lot of it is held up in immigration courts, and that's an incredibly slow-moving process, as I'm sure you all know. One of the issues with these multi-state transfers, I mean, people are thousands of miles away from their families, but they're also far away from their lawyers. If they had lawyers in Florida, for example, because their case was there, and now all of a sudden it's in New Mexico, they have to try to find a lawyer that can represent them in a different court. And that isn't always easy to do, especially because these tend to be more rural areas where pro bono lawyers are harder to come by, located farther away from the facilities themselves. So just the act of moving someone to a facility so far away, it does impact that person's right to due process.
There's some context here and sort of the internal workings of how these communities feel about these that I think is really interesting in your piece. County commissioners and how county commissioners look at this. You highlight Linda Yamarillo, who of the Torrance County Commission, who actually did go inside one of these facilities. And then you and the team wrote that she voted to extend the ICE contract. Talk to us a little bit, and it's not really town-gown relations, but it's the way that the community feels about this and the way that local elected officials feel about these.
Yeah, it's really striking to sit in on these county commission meetings because, the contract is up for an extension every so often, every several months, but no matter what, at every meeting, which is held, bi-weekly, there are a bunch of lawyers and advocates and even people who are in detention who record testimonies that they play to the commissioners during public comment, urging them to shut down Torrance County Detention Facility for ICE detention. And you have these three commissioners who sit at the front of the room, and they're listening to this. And some of the testimony is in Spanish, and Commissioner Jaramillo speaks Spanish. And so you can kind of watch her face as she's listening to people describe the conditions inside the facility. And what she told people at that meeting in particular was, look, I hear all these concerns, but I don't know what to trust. And so she ended up voting to extend it. Sorry, I lost my earpiece. But but it's unclear whether she'll do that in October, because she did go again and say that things seem to be going well, but she does still have concerns.
You know, I think it's interesting. And what I find fascinating is that this is a story that's got so many different angles to it. When you think about what these detention centers do for a local economy, there's that. But there's also then, as we've been talking about, the conditions, and you do wonder about the oversight, especially in an administration that has been cutting back on some of the federal spending in different areas. So, you know, Rachel, when you look at this story and this reporting, I mean, the cities or the local municipalities in many ways want them, right? Because it provides jobs, it provides some economic momentum. At the same time, there are concerns about kind of who's watching out for what's going. What does CoreCivic say about all of this?
Yeah, CoreCivic talks about how many people they employ locally. They talk about the salaries and the benefits that they provide. They, say that I think they said that they hire or have more than 300 jobs related to these facilities in New Mexico. So, I mean, they definitely see themselves as a major local economic benefit to the area. And that's, what we heard from the Estancia mayor as well. I mean, he talks a lot about how much of the gross receipts tax, which is New Mexico's version of a sales tax, that CoreCivic contributes to. So it's interesting to hear kind of I think Commissioner Jaramillo's put it succinctly when she was like, on the one hand, they're a major employer.
Yeah. Such a great story, so much in there. And as we said, it's a slice of life in this country. Bloomberg News investigations reporter Rachel Adams-Heard. Rachel, thank you. This is Bloomberg.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Let's turn to healthcare. U.S. Human and Health Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. removed every member of the CDC's vaccine advisory panel. In an opinion piece published in the Wall Street Journal, he said he made the move because members of the committee were receiving funding directly from pharmaceutical companies, a claim that so far has not been confirmed.
With uncertainty at the federal level, we wanted to get an overview of the industry with an executive who thinks about the space a lot. We turned to Wendy Barnes. She's president and CEO of GoodRx. We talked to her about the headwinds facing her industry, and it really ranges everything from tariffs to the impact of new regulations.
A lot to talk about. She kicked it off, highlighting a new company initiative aimed at supporting independent pharmacies in the U.S. It's called Community Link.
I would say the company's been on a multi-year journey to best partner with retail pharmacies, with community pharmacies really being at the top of that list. And this is really the culmination of that work. And so what you've referenced, the GoodRx Community Link, is a portal by which community pharmacies, sometimes referred to as independent pharmacies, so think of those as really your non-chain pharmacies. They can be as small as a single pharmacy, or some community independent pharmacy owners have, 50, 75, or 100 locations, but largely they're run independent of a broader management philosophy. And this is our effort to contract directly with these pharmacies in a cost plus reimbursement mechanism manner. Look, it's not any new news to you or probably to your listeners that pharmacies continue to be under reimbursement pressure. And we believe that they are key partners in our broader mission to make medications more affordable and accessible for every American. And so this effort is really one in which we're trying to bolster reimbursement for those independent pharmacies such that they can work with us directly And in addition to that, we're giving them access to 90 plus brand deals that we have secured with pharmaceutical manufacturers over the last 12 to 24 months, and those continue to grow, such that the reimbursement on those same drugs is favorable to those pharmacies. It's really no secret that pharmacies have long struggled to have a favorable margin profile on many brands that they fill. And this too gives access to those programs for those independent pharmacies.
Well, Wendy, anecdotally speaking, as the large pharmacies and the chains have come under pressure, whether it's over store closures or different things happening just in the space, we've all reported on what's happened in cities and the way that some of these pharmacies have closed down in certain cities. Are you seeing more people go to these independent pharmacies? I mean, anecdotally speaking, I can say that's certainly the way my family has changed its behavior, just thanks to availability and what pharmacies tend to actually have what we're looking for. But how have you seen that affect the overall landscape?
I don't know that we've seen a meaningful shift to independent from chain. I think there's still a pretty good mix of grocer versus independent versus chain, and candidly, mail order / digital pharmacy. I think at the end of the day, what we see is in the 70 plus odd thousand pharmacy options that we have as consumers in the US, that as a consumer, you just really want to get your drugs on your own terms, whether it's mailed to your home with your preferred community pharmacist or at a chain or grocer. And we pride ourselves on working really with all pharmacies such that you can get your drugs when and where you desire to do so.
Do you see at all that the independent channel is shrinking? We've certainly seen it with some of the big pharmacy chains, right? We've talked about it. You've seen the headlines. But I'm just curious, when it comes to independents, Wendy, do you see any shrinkage in terms of the number of outlets that are out there, or no?
I will say in the numbers that we've looked at over the last couple of years, there is still a good number opening in any given month. I will say in our book, with the pharmacies that we work with, I haven't seen significant shrinkage, but I think there are certainly other data sources that would suggest that there are a number of independent and or community pharmacies that are closing and or selling their business to other owners. But in our particular book, it's held pretty steady.
How have independents traditionally reacted to the program at GoodRx? Because it's our understanding they've been a little skeptical about it. How do you make sure that they're embracing it rather than treating it with skepticism?
Sure. Well, I think, look, it's early days, to be clear. And we're going to be on a journey here. Communication is going to be the biggest part of this program, in addition to delivering what we said we intend to deliver, which is fair economics over the course of these contractual agreements as pharmacies agree to contract with us directly. And that, again, can all be conveyed through that portal that we stood up this morning. So for me, it's really going to be about how we deliver on the reimbursement mechanism through this partnership. And I think, the ongoing communication will support how the pharmacy community embraces this over time. We've certainly been sending out communications early on. We've been in dialogue with many independent pharmacy owners to speak through the program. But I think at the end of the day, it's really going to be the outcome of the program and the economics that we deliver that will prove it out over time.
Well, that's why I want to kind of just dig a little bit deeper, Wendy. For this to work for you guys, this new rollout, this Community Links program, the economics have to work right for the independent pharmacy. So I'm just curious what you can tell us how the economics are different for the pharmacy that directly contacts with GoodRx versus using maybe one of the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, and their networks to dispense a prescription. What can you tell us more specifically about the economic advantage for independent pharmacies to use your route versus going to the PBMs?
Sure, happy to do so. So it's really, the agreement directly with us is rooted on a NADAC plus reimbursement. So NADAC is one of multiple benchmarks that is effectively a cost mechanism. It stands for National Average Drug Acquisition Cost. And we are negotiating with independent pharmacies to do this with that predicated as the baseline plus an amount that keeps them profitable on filling these claims. So that's really the precursor, if you will, and or the meat of how this agreement will work, which again provides favorable economics to these pharmacies. The distinction, Carol, as you called out, to perhaps doing it through a larger payer, when you think about how it works through, let's just say, a larger PBM, there are multiple patient pay/cash networks through which an independent pharmacy can participate. And when they're in that type of an algorithm, for lack of better description, typically it's going to search for not necessarily favorable margin for the pharmacy. And so there would be times in their previous arrangement whereby they may not always have favorable economics to fill those prescriptions. And by contracting directly, we're putting terms and conditions in the agreement that allow them to have certainty around not only the reimbursement, but also access to drugs that they're not fulfilling today in patient pay programs. Again, that would be the list of brands that I mentioned that I believe are 90 plus at this point. So they're going to have certainty around how they're reimbursed in this direct engagement through us that they're not getting through their arrangements today.
Thinking about healthcare in the United States, it is inextricably bound to politics, and no question, if the what the president calls the big beautiful bill were to pass, we could see, at least according to the CBO, estimates of a dramatic increase in the number of uninsured, almost 8 million. What does that mean for your business, and how much of your business comes from Medicaid and uninsured people today?
So interestingly, of the users who access our pricing on any given day, roughly 90% actually have insurance today. So I think there's a bit of a misperception that the overwhelming number of consumers who use us, in fact, don't have insurance, which is not the case. Having said that, who does come and look for pricing through our different platforms is your consumer who's motivated to check for competitive pricing, whether they have insurance or not. And we continue to be the #1 platform to look for the best price deal that you can find on any particular medication. So as it pertains to what may or may not pass in the bill, whether it's inclusive of Medicaid cuts, which continue to be advanced, and or other cuts that would put pressure on your typical household income, what we do know is that those should produce tailwinds for us as a business for consumers, whether they're insured or not. But specifically as it relates to Medicaid cuts and the number of individuals that may fall out of coverage, we do believe that that presents an opportunity for us to continue to support any American that really is struggling to purchase their medications.
Wendy, just got 30 seconds. You know, the word that we all use to describe the environment right now is uncertain. There's a lot coming at certainly leaders and CEOs. Just in your industry, too, you've got Rite Aid doing a bankruptcy. You know, I think about the macro within your business and just macro overall. How do you look at the outlook, just quickly?
You know, the outlook, you're right. Turbulent is a fair description. Having said that, businesses that stay the course and have a mission that makes sense for the consumers in which we serve will continue to thrive. And our goal, of course, is getting medication affordably and effectively into the hands of every American who need it. And we believe we'll be in a position to take advantage.
Wendy Barnes, President and CEO of GoodRx.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Plenty ahead in our second hour of the weekend edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, including a deep dive into Cisco Live 2025, held this past week in San Diego. Tim and I were there.
We were broadcasting live with some of Cisco's top experts and leaders as we unpacked what's next for the company and how it's navigating the ever-evolving world of tech.
Got to say, it sounds like Cisco is definitely going into a big new chapter for the company that has been around for a long time. We want to share with you a few of our conversations from the event, and there's no better place to start with than AI, which really dominated a lot of our conversations. Cisco recently announced that it's updating its networking and security products to make artificial intelligence networks work better. And we got into that and more with Cisco's Vice President of Product, AI Software and Platform, DJ Sampath.
DJ here. I mean, you look around at any of the trade floors and this is the massive and dominant theme here. I want to talk a little bit about the news that we got earlier today that Cisco is updating its networking and security products to make AI networks speedier and more secure. It's part of this broader push to capitalize on the AI spending boom. Talk to us a little bit about what prompted this, and we're going to speak about it throughout the program because this is some big news to emerge. But what you're hearing from customers on the customer front, where we are in the AI moment, and really what prompted a move such as this.
Yeah, Tim, Carol, thanks so much for having me. There's a huge tectonic change that's happening right now, right? If you think about the moment where ChatGPT came into our zeitgeist in November of 2022, we've now started understanding that AI is here. It's not a buzzword. We go to ChatGPT for a lot of questions, existential ones, like, should I take this job? Should I not take this job? A lot of interesting things that you start to see that are being broken down very systematically by AI as a thought partner, right? But what we're seeing now is that evolution from AI being an application or a chatbot to an agentic AI, right? So you've got agents that are autonomously going out and performing tasks for you. And as you start to think about that, what's going to happen is your workforce, which has now gotten, 100% of humans, is going to be augmented with, AI applications, AI agents, robots, and humanoids. In fact, you're going to start to see that happen. And these robots and humanoids are going to have AI models sitting inside of them. So what we're seeing is that you're going to start to see a lot of change in the way these networks work, and how employees are going to work inside of these organizations. So, we're just tremendously excited about that, and we're getting ready. At Cisco, we know it's coming. We've helped usher in the era of the internet, and we're now ready to usher in the era of AI, agentic AI, more specific.
What's surprising you about kind of the progression? You're right. It's like 2 years ago, right? It was like bam. But I think for us, it was just over the last few months that we have increasingly been using ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
In a more aggressive way.
Claude, I use a lot.
I use Claude a lot. Yeah. There you go. Here's what I'll tell you. In the trenches right now, the speed with which AI has been moving has been absolutely mind-boggling. The progress that we're starting to see. I'll give you an example. You mentioned Claude. Claude is an amazing, piece of, software from a model perspective that allows you to write code really well. Claude is one of the top ones that they use to do software engineering. A lot of people thought that, AI is going to, sort of come for our jobs, and, software engineers are probably not the ones that it's going to come for. It's going to take a long time to get there. But guess what? It's here and it's now, but it's not taking away the jobs. In fact, every single developer is becoming a lot more productive using AI. So essentially what's going to happen is it's not like you're going to have to worry about jobs. I think, people that use AI are going to, take the jobs of people that don't use AI. So you're going to just start to see that AI becomes extremely helpful from a productivity perspective.
I want to go back to agentic AI, and I know it's something that you think a lot about. We hear it a lot from Salesforce, for example, right now. I still think, though, when it comes to the general consumer, agentic AI is for the early adopters right now. It's for the people who do want to pay $200 a month, for example, for a version of ChatGPT that will make reservations for you at a restaurant or help you with travel plans. What does it look like beyond early adoption?
Yeah, I'll talk about one of the key things that you'll notice is that the rate at which things moved, if you go back to just using the chatbot, the very first time you used ChatGPT, it had a knowledge cutoff, right? You could only get information from 2021.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then they opened it up to be able to do live web searches, right? That is actually, teaching a model how to use the tool. And then you saw that it went from just being able to do a search to hey, you can now start to connect these models to your emails. You can now start connecting these models to your Salesforce and instance, and then slowly it's expanding. It's now connecting into your Google Docs and your Microsoft Office, environments. Very quickly, what you're seeing is that we're in this exponent of the speed with which things are moving, and we're just at that beginning part of that exponent. So you're right. Sometimes it feels like some of these things are very early from a consumer perspective. But if you start to think about what's happening inside of the enterprises are starting to adopt AI a whole lot faster because they need to maintain the competitive edge. But a key thing for them to be able to adopt AI is security, is safety and security. You've got to make sure.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because in order for you really to kind of max out the potential of it, you've got to open it up, right, to kind of all your different systems. So how do you make sure that that is really, really secure?
And that's top of mind when it comes to agentic AI, because you are now saying, hey, you're going to allow these agents to execute tasks on your behalf all the way to completion. So which means you've got to make sure, you're thinking about safety and security. And I'll talk about what we launched earlier. This year at Cisco, we had a product called Cisco AI Defense. Knowing that this is going to be top of mind for a lot of enterprises, we built technology that does, provides you with the visibility of all of these agents, gives you the ability to validate these models to make sure these models are not vulnerable. Because here's what happens, right? If you go back to the age of the internet, when the internet came out, the attackers started doing a whole lot of interesting things. They would do denial of service attacks and DDoS and so on and so forth. We're starting to see similar types of things happen with AI applications. So we got to make sure that we're protecting against attacks, new types of attacks, like prompt injection attacks and so on and so forth.
Okay, so what about the type of attack where, this is a little scary, but I think this is what's happening, where we are mimicked, our voices are mimicked, and perhaps a loved one is called, and AI is able to pretend that we're in a situation that requires the help from a loved one. I mean, this could happen. Yeah. This could happen now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's happening now, just to be very clear, because spam and phishing attacks with AI can become really, really gnarly. Like, you're going to see a lot more of these attacks. The cost to do those attacks are going to drop dramatically, which means you got to use AI to be able to defend as well. It's not just about using AI for attacking, you use AI for defending. So there are two parts to this. You want to make sure you're securing the use of AI, and you also want to make sure that you're using AI to make security better. And at Cisco, we're doing both simultaneously.
So what's the thing that keeps you up at night? Like, I just do think about some of this is happening. Like, we've moved so quickly, it seems like all of a sudden, from generative to agentic AI. And I think people are just catching up to be like, what is this all about? So what is it that kind of worries you as things move so fast?
I think one of the biggest things is, there's always this feeling like we're not moving fast enough, because...
So do you feel the pressure from customers?
I think at this point in time, everybody's feeling the pressure. When you talk to anybody that is in AI, the rate at which AI is moving, everybody's just trying to make sure that they're keeping up with the advances that's happening across the entire ecosystem.
Hey, DJ, I'm curious about the fragmentation in the security market right now, and I'm wondering how you see Cisco potentially playing a role when it comes to consolidating all the features and the functions that are out there.
This is a top of mind issue for a lot of CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers that are looking to consolidate a lot of the different point products that are there inside of their ecosystem. Cisco, as you know, with the acquisition of Splunk, is one of the largest security companies on the planet at this point. And we've taken a very intentional approach to consolidating a lot of these things into a single pane of glass. What we launched earlier this year was something called Security Cloud Control, and this is a consolidation effort. You don't have to worry about each and every single point product that's inside of your ecosystem, but you bring it all together and you use AI assistance to be able to manage all of these products. So, we're entering into that AI and agentic era. Yeah. You've got to have those capabilities so that the defenders have the advantage over the attackers that are cloning your voice and doing those phishing attacks. You really need to give the defenders an advantage, and that's really what we're doing at Cisco.
One of the things, and we look at kind of the universe, your competitors as well, and when investors think of network security, they often think of Palo Alto Networks and some other players that are out there, especially when it comes to the firewall space. I'm just curious, are there products, DJ, or software that can kind of change market perception, investor perceptions, and market share dynamics?
Absolutely. One of the key things about the way you're starting to see these attacks evolve, especially in the age of AI and agentic era, you got to realize that one of the core enforcement points for stopping all of these bad actors and bad attacks is in the network. Now, when you take that security and the promise of security that we have and we fuse it into the fabric of the network, that's when you're really moving the needle. And so when you think about Cisco, you see that we bring both of these. We've been doing networking for the past 40 years.
Long time.
We've been doing security for a pretty long time, too. But when you start to combine those two things in a single place, man, we're miles ahead of everybody else that's out there.
30 seconds. What's surprising you that you're hearing at this event? We're just blown away, and the conversation just got about 30 seconds. What are you hearing as kind of a dynamic narrative?
One of the core things that I'm seeing that's really surprising is the number of customers that are implementing AI infrastructure projects inside of their own enterprise environments. They realize that AI cannot be somebody else's AI. AI has to be their own, and they want to run this inside of their own data centers. And that, to me, is very welcome, and I'm very happily surprised by that, because we're ready to help them.
So that means a lot of on-site, on-premise, right?
That's exactly right.
It's not all up in the cloud.
Not all up in the cloud, because they have lots and lots of this data that's proprietary, that's sitting inside of their own environments that they're not quite ready to push it into the cloud.
Which I think is surprising, but here it's happening. DJ, thank you so much. Great way to kick off our coverage here.
Thank you, Carol. Thanks, Tim.
DJ Sampath, Senior Vice President of Cisco's AI Software and Platform Group.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We are across the country. We're on the West Coast, staying here. Some great conversations here at Cisco Live 2025. There's so much happening around Tim and me, and we've got a great guest to kind of get into some of the enterprise connectivity issues, collaboration, because that's what he oversees.
Anurag Dhingra is Senior Vice President and General Manager of the Enterprise Connectivity and Collaboration Group at Cisco. He's also founding executive sponsor of Cisco's Responsible AI Initiative, which means we're going to talk a little AI as well. I want to talk, you oversee this diverse portfolio of collaboration tools that are all under Cisco's umbrella. When you think about what collaboration in the workplace means right now with a distributed workforce, with some people working from home, some people at the office, all at the same time, what's the one solution that can bring them all together?
Thank you for having me, Tim, on the program. So when you think about collaboration, it's more than just the tools you use to meet with people or to call people. Obviously, those are essential tools. But it starts with foundational technology, which is the network. You want to make sure that everyone can connect seamlessly and securely to the network first, no matter where they're working from. And our definition of the workplace is quite expansive. We talk about a regular office, we talk about a retail store, a factory floor, or your home or your car, wherever you work from is a workplace. And so it starts with foundational elements of connectivity. And then once you're connected, then it's all about delivering the best possible experience. And so one of the things that Cisco's been innovating in is this concept of distance zero. And the idea is very simple. When you're meeting with other people who are not in the same room with you, it should feel like there's no distance between you. And so we've been working on technology, whether that is video conferencing technology, whether that is services that we deliver, to amazing experiences that bring people closer together.
What's the biggest hiccup that prevents people from actually experiencing distance zero? Is it connectivity issues?
So I think it's a mix of things, right? So first, this connectivity has to be rock solid. And, when you're thinking about the diversity of spaces that we're talking about, sometimes you don't have solid Wi-Fi. In a conference like this, it can be very tricky.
The hotel?
As an example.
I don't know, Carol, if you experienced this, I was like just getting dropped on my...
Right.
The computer was fine, the phone wasn't. And it was actually really hard to work.
Yeah, we take connectivity for granted, but it's actually still very complex, and especially for people who build and manage these networks, the complexity is only growing with emergence of AI, agents, and digital workers in the workplace. It's only going to get more complicated. So we're very focused on how do we deliver amazing experiences for people who are connecting, but how do you make it easier for IT to manage it all?
Anurag, are networks generally ready for AI, or would you say no?
I would say they're not ready right now. And here's why I say that. Look, everyone can feel that this is transformative technology, and we are at the beginning of a major technology shift. When you look back at other technology disruptions, the beginning of the internet, mobile devices, cloud computing, it caused us to take a step back and reimagine how networks should be built and managed. And AI is much bigger than that. When you think about the proliferation of AI agents in the workforce, digital workers that are doing human-like work, they're communicating and doing work like us, but at machine speed and scale. So the networks have to really deal with an influx of much bigger traffic patterns and security surface areas that are exploding there.
Well, one thing I want to ask you, I know we're dying to ask you questions. I am curious about, because we keep thinking about the CapEx spend, right? And all that is AI.
Right.
But I'm also thinking about, are they not going to do the spend because they're worried about the power being there for all the AI? Yeah. And I use the term AI loosely, right? There's a lot going on. But is the power not necessarily there and the systems there? We keep doing some reporting on that front. That's going to slow some of that spend.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, this is going to be essential technology. This is almost like if you ask someone today, do you want connection to the internet? Of course, the answer is yes. So this is not going to be optional. Organizations have to figure out how to enable their workforce with AI tooling. But how do you do that in a scalable fashion? That's really the question. And I think there are two parts to this power equation. So one is for training models, these large data centers that are being built out around the world to create these models, they are very power hungry. But when you think about deploying AI applications in your office environment, you have to make sure that even there you're building scalable and devices that are power efficient. And that's what we're focused on with the number of new product announcements that we made here. these network devices, whether those are switches or routers or wireless access points, they're built to be very efficient from a power consumption point of view.
Because you oversee this portfolio of tools that are meant for helping collaboration across different areas, you must have some really cool statistics when it comes to who's working from home,
right,
who's returning to the office. We've been talking a lot about this even 5 years in, past COVID. Even in London, for example, many banks are facing a shortage of desks because of a real estate squeeze, but they're trying to get people to come back into the office. So there's this tension happening there. What are the patterns that you're seeing emerge in different parts of the world right now when it comes to return to the office?
Yeah, so I think most companies have settled into a rhythm. Most companies have people coming back into the office at least part of the week. Now, it varies quite a bit across the globe, and it also depends on the organizational culture. But what we are seeing is most companies are back in the offices 2 to 3 days a week at least. In the United States, there is generally a culture of remote work and hybrid work, much more than what we see in the rest of the world. But even here, most companies have settled into a rhythm. Now, what's essential is, even if people are in the office, let's say 3 days a week, there are other people who are remote, and you might be working outside of your organization with partners and customers, so there's always going to be people who are remote, who are not in the same room as yourself. And this is why at Cisco we are very focused on how to build the right technology so it feels like there's no distance between you.
So mobility within the enterprise, is it going to impact more the people who are working from home already, or is it going to be more influential on the people back at the office?
I think it's both, right?
Okay.
I think it is really a hierarchy of needs for employees, right? It starts with, if I'm in the office or in my home office, do I have the tools, the basic tools to get my job done? So that's number one, right? And that's where connectivity and meeting tools and things like that come up. But after that, it's how do I collaborate with my team? How do I get more creative? How do I actually get creative work done when we may or may not be in the same room? And if I get to the office, I want to make sure it's worth my commute to the office, that I can find a desk to sit with my team. I can find a conference room when I need it. The environment has to be very supportive if I'm going to make the trip to the office.
I think about kind of the connectivity that we have as we go from office to office, right? Whether it's printers, I mean, something basic, but we can...
But it works.
But exactly.
Yeah.
We pop into a system.
Despite everything I try to do to make it not work. It's still...
or remotely at home, being able to
foolproof.
remote access. Like, it is pretty amazing,
There's a
right?
reason why they have us practice that stuff.
No,
Truly,
seriously.
it's like a requirement. Hey, we don't have a ton of time with you, but I want to talk a little bit about AI in a couple different contexts.
Sure.
One about AI embedded in WebEx and call center products and
Right.
sort of the progress that you're making there, if you're able to monetize it.
Right.
And then I want to get to Safe AI in just a second. But first talk to WebEx and the collaboration tool.
Right. So WebEx really has kind of two parts of the portfolio. One is really focused on meetings and callings and things like that. And that's where AI is really an assistant for you. It can generate meeting summaries. It can take notes for you. It can do things for you. In the contact center space, in the customer experience space, we have now new AI-based agents. These agents are completely autonomous. They can talk to a human as a human.
It's pretty crazy.
So they're voice enabled. But if you want to chat with it, of course, chatbots have been around for a long time.
Right.
What's different about these agents now is they can actually take actions. So they'll understand your intent. And, if you say, look, hey, I want to reschedule my doctor's appointment, they'll go ahead and do that for you, send you a notification as a confirmation. And we're seeing tremendous demand for this technology. And this is starting to make a lot of difference in the customer service experience.
So I'm not going to get attitude when I call my doctor's office and
They have it's like the Seinfeld where like your folder has been flagged already, so you get directly.
I definitely have been flagged.
You've been
good,
flagged.
in a good way and in a bad way, probably.
Okay.
I want to ask you though, during COVID, you mentioned WebEx. I mean, why didn't you guys take better advantage or more advantage during COVID? Do you just talk to us a little bit about during the lockdowns, just like Zoom did?
Yeah, so I think our focus has always been helping large enterprises connect their employees, and we were very successful in that space, and we continue to do that. Cisco never really took this COVID as an opportunity to go into consumers. We did make WebEx available for free to lots of governments, charitable organizations, educational institutes. So we did that, but our focus was very much around being an enterprise product. Now when you think about where we've come along with the advent of AI, with autonomous agents as part of the WebEx, and all of the stuff that I was talking about earlier about distance zero and conference room, I believe that the product has come a very long way, and it's amazing. And so you actually have to see it to believe it. A lot of people haven't experienced it in a while, so I would encourage anyone to take a look and see how far we've come.
I mentioned that you're founding executive sponsor of Cisco's Responsible AI initiative.
Right.
What is responsible AI, and what's irresponsible AI? And I want you to answer the irresponsible part first.
Yeah, so when we started this journey several years ago, generative AI is obviously the trend right now, but we started this even before people were talking about generative AI. The idea really was, how do you make sure that bias doesn't creep into AI systems? That if AI is starting to make autonomous decisions that are consequential, that those are done in a responsible way, and how do you put guardrails around those systems? When we are building technology, how do we make sure this technology is used more for good than for nefarious reasons? So that's really the genesis of that program, and then we came up with a few principles, and then that translated into development guidelines for our people.
Can you, when you look across the landscape, can you give us examples of AI that's not responsible, something that concerns you out there?
Well, I'll tell you, like, these systems that are starting to show up in workplaces right now, they are not very deterministic. They're powered by language models that can hallucinate, so they can say bad things, they can make things up. So
you're talking about deployment of potentially tools that everybody knows about across enterprises,
right,
and not living up to the expectations that the customers have.
I'll give you, yes, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So imagine if there was an automated system that was approving your mortgage application, and that system just decided to decline your application for reasons that are not even explainable because this algorithm is a black box. Well, that is not very good. So you want to make sure that there's a way to protect against that. Or imagine hate speech creeping into this chatbot that you're interfacing with in a customer service scenario. How do you protect against those things? You can't do that if you haven't systematically thought about being responsible with these systems. And that is where that program comes in handy.
What?
I don't know how you feel about this, but it seems like people accept answers from LLMs in a way they didn't accept answers
from Google
in the early part of search.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way?
I think yes, and I think there's also emerging research that people are nicer to AI than they are to people, which is interesting.
I think you're right. I think they feel like they have this relationship with this thing.
I'm constantly pushing back on ChatGPT.
Yeah, I'm often cross-referencing, going somewhere else and checking out things.
But this is why it is really important that we build trustworthy systems, and then we go out of our way to make sure that you can trust the response that you're getting out of these systems, which is why these programs are critical.
And I think about, so we Google.
Yeah.
And we do trust our responses.
Right.
And there are there's different ways of kind of checking on it. What will be the gut check on LLMs? Will there be rating systems? Will there be, how does that progress?
Right. So one of the things that we are doing here at Cisco, earlier in the year, we announced a product called AI Defense. And the idea is very simple. First, it starts with observing how people are using these applications. And then second, you can start to put some guardrails. So you can start to sanitize the inputs that people are getting to these large language models. You can also do the same thing in the other way around. So, for example, you wanted to protect people from hate speech, you can put those type of guardrails. You wanted to make sure that these models are not hallucinating and not giving you wrong answers.
Right.
You can start to put guardrails around that. And so you will see a lot of these tools emerge. And the models themselves are getting better with these type of protections. But I think there's always going to be a need to have tools that you can control as an organization that not only comply with the law of the land, but also with your values, with your policies. And so it's important to have those type of tools.
It's interesting. I spent a lot of time with ChatGPT, a lot of time with Anthropic's Claude. And, one thing that I've noticed about Claude, and this is Sonnet 4, is
You're
that...
playing with it.
It says, I'm playing with it so I can pull this up. It says, Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.
Yes.
Whereas there's not necessarily that same that's after every answer with Claude.
Right.
You don't have that same answer with ChatGPT. With Claude, it won't generate images for you.
Right.
Do we have it with even Google?
With Google's AI feature
search, with normal search.
Well, normal, but I feel like that's just in our DNA as people who search for things.
I guess.
I feel like internet culture, we were taught to be skeptical of what you find on the internet.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily taught to be skeptical of the answers that these LLMs are giving us. Is that wrong?
Well, I think there are different companies who are taking different approaches to it. You just pointed out with what you saw on Claude. And so I think there is a need to drive more awareness that you should not blindly trust what you get out of these systems, and you should always have sort of a skeptical mindset for these type of things. But companies who are putting these disclaimers, I think they are doing the right thing by making the user aware of these challenges.
We're speaking with Anurag Dhingra, Senior Vice President and General Manager of the Enterprise Connectivity and Collaboration Group at Cisco.
So I'm just thinking, our audience, it's a smart one. It's an investor audience. Right. I mean, when you think about when they're looking at companies who are embracing AI and building out their infrastructure, what do they want to see from their companies to make sure that they are doing that well? So, what's your thinking about what businesses should be doing to create safe, secure AI infrastructure?
Right. So the first thing I'll say is you want to make sure that your infrastructure is ready to deploy AI at scale. Because this is being the difference. Deploying AI could be the difference between you being a leader in your space and being irrelevant. And so it is very important to start with what do I need in terms of network connectivity? How do I have scalable networks that are not just ready for the traffic that you're running on them today, but the use cases that AI is going to unlock tomorrow? How do you secure it? This is why all the announcements that we made here at Cisco Live are really about AI-ready, secure networking products, scalable devices, security at the core of the network. So that's number one. Second, with applications like AI defense that I was talking about earlier, those start to put guardrails around safe and secure use of AI. And then if you are in the business of building applications, building products, then I would encourage every company to think about how you're going to protect your systems, how you're going to make sure that your systems are used for good. This is where programs like the Responsible AI program come into play.
I feel like, especially with publicly held companies, there'll be like a whole new section, like when they either report or something, right? Like that we will be dealing with to get an idea of how safe and secure their systems are.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's going to be like security.
Yeah.
And as these challenges become more well known, as companies become more aware, they'll start to demand systems that can provide the visibility on what's happening with the use of these tools.
It's definitely a new world order, but really fascinating. Anurag, thank you so much. Covered so much ground. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck at the rest of the event. Anurag Dhingra, Senior Vice President, General Manager, Enterprise Connectivity and Collaboration here at Cisco Live 2025.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
We're highlighting some of our favorite conversations from Cisco Live 2025.
Now, as President and Chief Product Officer at Cisco, Jeetu Patel is responsible for charting the path forward for the company through all the changes and the growth of artificial intelligence. It's a lot.
We spoke to him at the conference about everything going on at Cisco, including why the event itself is so important.
Look, these are our customers, they're our partners, and they're companies who are considering buying Cisco technology. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we're very clear with is what are the core problems we're solving and what are the key innovations that we're making. And we want to make sure that we can provide that to them and have them talk to the technical experts so that they can actually learn about the products and, kind of pressure test them while they're here. We're in a really interesting place right now because we're in the next era of AI. So the past 2.5 years since ChatGPT came about, we had this kind of seismic shift that happened in the industry, and we had these chatbots that could intelligently answer questions that we had. And we're now going to this next era where there's going to be agents that can conduct tasks and jobs fully autonomously on our behalf. Initially, they'll start working by themselves for a couple hours, and then over time, there might be a couple of days, and then a couple of months, and a couple of quarters. And the possibility of the kinds of problems we can solve are so amazing, and we want to make sure that we provide the infrastructure to make that happen.
So are you talking about, with the agentic solutions that you're talking about, are you talking about inference specifically?
Correct. So we've been working on, working with people on making sure that we can provide the infrastructure for training for the past couple of years.
And that's where a lot of the
spend has been.
A lot of the spend, a lot of the rewarding by shareholders of certain companies, no question,
has been to date. But now what you're starting to see is the demand signal for inferencing is going up quite a bit. And if you think about what's happening in inferencing, when you just had an interactive mode where you would ask a chatbot a question, what would happen is you would have spikes of peaks that you would get on compute usage and on data center usage. When you have an agent, and that agent is fully autonomously and proactively working on something, and they're just kind of cranking away, and there's not just one agent, there's tens of agents working together, what you see is a sustained demand for inferencing capacity, and it's persistent inferencing that's needed. So your infrastructure kind of assumptions, the amount of network bandwidth you need, the amount of kind of safety and security that needs to be in play is very, very different. And so right now we're working with a lot of the governments who want to make sure that they have sovereign data centers all throughout the world.
Right.
We are also working with...
that's a big demand push right now, isn't it?
Huge demand push. I was in the Middle East just a couple of weeks ago, and we announced partnerships with Humane and Saudi Arabia. We announced partnerships with G42, with Stargate UAE. And the reason for this is because there's an insatiable demand right now. If you think about what's the constraint in AI today, it's infrastructure and it's safety and security, where people have to trust these systems, otherwise they're not going to use them. And so those are the two big constraints. And of course, the third one is a skills gap where you have to keep training people up. But the first two are pretty material. And imagine if we had a world where infrastructure was not a constraint. Imagine all the problems we could solve that we're currently not able to solve because of the constraint of infrastructure.
But some of those constraints are serious, G2. And I think about, as you guys are ramping up and building out and providing what customers need, though, whether it's enough power to do it all, how are you guys kind of balancing that you're doing what you need to be doing, but making sure everything else is there to support it?
I mean, if you think about the large constraints, they're compute, they're power, because GPUs are power hungry, and then there's network bandwidth. And then there's safety and security. Those are the four kind of high-level buckets. If you think about power, what we are trying to do is make sure that we can have the lowest amount of latency, the highest performance, and the most power efficiency, because how long it takes for a packet to get to the GPU to get processed really matters. And if you have idle time on a GPU, that's actually not a good thing. You want to make sure that you're keeping the GPU utilization high. And so we need to make sure that we have power efficiency. Every kilowatt of power we save is a kilowatt of power you can give to the GPU, and then we need to make sure that the packets keep flowing.
So capability and efficiency, you're constantly balancing.
Constantly balancing it.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Because you've got to make sure it's efficient, otherwise it's not going to be financially going to make sense.
That's exactly right, because if you don't have the right level of power efficiency. Firstly, all of the data centers that are getting built right now, we are running out of data centers to build in certain geographies because you don't have enough power. So you actually tend to go to where the power is, and data centers are getting built where the power is. So it's a very important commodity.
Is that true globally?
Yeah, it's absolutely. You're
the
starting
data
to
set,
see,
like running out of places to run data centers because of lack of power.
Yeah, you just need you need to be not too far from the power so that the entropy is less and how that whole thing works.
You're good, Carol. I
love the enthusiasm between the two of you, though.
I've got a whole list of questions that I want to make sure we get to.
We said we can go as long with G2 as you will give us.
Yes, that is
go as long as you want.
That is the answer. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship that you have with NVIDIA?
Yes.
Because I think a lot of investors are trying to understand from a customer perspective, from just a relationship perspective. What can you tell us?
So we have enjoyed a very meaningful partnership with them for the past 6 years. 6 years ago, we decided that we're going to use the NVIDIA chipsets in our video conferencing devices, and that made those devices very, kind of AI ready. And now what you see is a lot of kind of sophisticated AI capabilities are uploaded on the device itself, so that even if the device integrates with a third party like Microsoft Teams, they can benefit from the AI innovations that we've made. So that's been a great partnership. What we did in the past few months, though, is we have doubled down on the partnership with data centers. And so we had announced that we have a AI factory and secure AI factory, which is basically what NVIDIA has as a reference architecture, which is a suggested mode of how companies should think about building out their infrastructure. And for the very first time, they had a non-NVIDIA silicon provider that was actually part of that reference architecture, who was Cisco. And we were the first one of those that they actually incorporated into their architecture. Why is that important? Because customers look to NVIDIA to say, hey, what does your reference architecture look like? And now Cisco is part of that reference architecture. So that was the first thing. But what we've also done and what we announced today was our safety and security capabilities are pretty sophisticated. And we want to make sure that we actually tie that with NVIDIA's kind of efforts around, if you're building a open source model and an application with the NeMo framework, we can now validate that model with Cisco. And so we aren't just helping with NVIDIA on building a secure AI factory with the infrastructure and a full stack, but we're also helping with how do you keep it secure and how do you keep it safe. And so, because one of the challenges that you have is if people don't trust their AI systems, they're not going to use them. And so we want to make sure that people are trusting them.
We're talking with G2 Patel, President and Chief Product Officer at Cisco. We're here at Cisco Live 2025. What's the productive conversation around? So much focus is on, especially when it comes to NVIDIA and their demand for chips, the hyperscalers, how much they are doing to get an idea of where we are in the AI race. But I'm also, you talk to you folks, and it's a lot of on-premise build out. So what's the
both actually?
Yeah, or both. Okay, so what's the mix in terms of how we see this continue to grow?
So I think the way that you will see this progress forward is there's 3 or 4 different models that'll be out there. Firstly, one of the very counterintuitive things is hyperscalers are going to grow very rapidly, private data centers are going to grow very rapidly, and neoclouds, which are actually AI specialists, are going to grow very rapidly, and so are service providers. So when there's kind of a rising tide, all boats rise, and that's what's happening right now. Now, what is happening that's unique with data sovereignty and with kind of nationalistic behaviors that are kind of progressing from a geopolitical standpoint is there's more and more of an acceleration of demand of private data centers.
Yeah, we talked about this on-prem.
On-prem,
yeah.
And specifically for inferencing. I think for training,
that's interesting.
People might go to the cloud, but
do you see that as being part of a government regulation, a sovereignty issue, or is it more on an individual company basis?
It's actually a combination of issues. It's there's a sovereignty issue. There's also a data proximity issue. There might also be some companies who have enough scale where the scale itself might give them an advantage that they're like, hey, I don't need to go pay someone something. I might want to have some of the workloads on my own premise. And so it's a combination of multiple issues. But what you are seeing is there's this kind of upsurge of demand and acceleration. The good news for us is we help the largest of hyperscalers with intra-cluster communication, on the networking side. We are also working with neo cloud providers, and then we've had relationships with service providers for the past couple of decades, and now what you're starting to see is a resurgence of demand on the enterprise that we know really, really well. We've actually been working with enterprise data centers for the past 40 years. And now we are actually starting to see a massive resurgence because of AI inferencing demand. And the agentic workflows, when every company is starting to rethink their workflows, whether it be a healthcare company or a bank or a financial services or insurance company, every workflow is getting reimagined. Infrastructure is going to be built out everywhere, and we want to make sure that we are the common networking substrate, and we are the common security and safety kind of provider across the board.
So G2, in an environment where we constantly are talking about an uncertain environment because there's stuff coming at us even today as we kind of continue to watch the negotiations between U.S. and Chinese officials over in London, how would you describe demand, the CapEx spend that you are seeing, whether it's the hyperscalers, whether it's those folks building their enterprise systems, like the different buckets that you play into?
The demand signal is stronger than ever. I've never seen anything stronger on the demand signal side, because you've got trillions of dollars that are going to be flowing in for these data center build out capacities. So the demand signal is very strong. It's actually also happening globally. So it's not just happening in the U.S. You're starting to see demand in the Middle East. You're starting to see it in Europe. You're going to start to see it in Asia. And one of the things that's important for America is we want to make sure that American technologies are being utilized in all these data center build-outs, because that's good for America, and that's good for the world, frankly. And so, Cisco and NVIDIA and OpenAI and others and all of our partners, I think AMD, it's extremely important that we all work together to make sure that these kind of data center build-outs happen with our technology.
You're shocking me with the striking magnitude of these investments.
It's
where is money not being spent as a result? As budgets get reallocated toward infrastructure, what's not getting money?
I think what you'll find is in the short term, you actually have to take a certain amount of dollars from existing projects and move them towards AI. And almost every company is doing that. They're saying, I'm going to take 20% out from my existing projects, move them towards AI. Over time, what you find is AI will get so much productivity that those 20% of the projects will get rehydrated. Because if you think about, like, for example, we're one of the first partners with OpenAI on their Codex project, which is the autonomous software engineer. It's no longer where you just have an autocomplete where you can have an individual developer that gets productive. You can actually now tell an agent or a group of agents, go solve a really hard problem for me and come back to me in a couple of weeks. And we'll be able to actually have a world that we're living in relatively short kind of time horizons, where it'll be able to solve that problem and come back to you, and you'll still have the human in the loop that'll be able to observe and they'll be able to do things. But imagine what that does for the constraint. We have 27,000 engineers. I've never felt more constrained in my life about the ideas I have compared to the resources I have to prosecute those ideas, and we will actually get to a point where we can unlock those ideas in a very different way.
What?
I was just going to say, we could go on forever with G2, but apparently his team is telling us that you have to go speak. There's like even a speaking engagement
Keep
coming
going.
up. Oh. He doesn't want to do it. He wants to hang out with us instead.
You guys are too fun.
Hey, we're going to get in trouble if we do that.
Well, I mean, I'm going to go.
You go.
I mean, we're just kind of blown away every day, like what we are learning about this and how it's impacting our world. I mean, I don't know, 6 months from now, a year from, like, how should we be thinking about how dramatically this will impact everything?
I think firstly, your imagination will be challenged quite a bit because humans have a very hard time thinking exponentially for a sustained period of time. And this curve is exponential. And when it's exponential, it's not happening in a single dimension. It's happening across multiple dimensions all at once. And so if you think about it 6 months or 12 months or 18 months from now, no longer are you just going to be thinking about this as a more efficient way for getting an answer, but you will have companions and sidekicks and a staff of people that are digital workers that can get a job done that you would have otherwise not had a time to do. And one important area to talk about is a lot of people worry about, is AI going to take my job? Mm-hmm. I actually worry more about people that use AI really well. There's a higher risk of them taking your job than AI taking your job.
Noted.
And the other piece that I also think about is, if you actually have, there's no one that I know that comes home every day and says, you know what, I've gotten everything done on my checklist, right? And so the reality is when there's 80% of the work that we do probably doesn't get checked off because we don't have time to do it. Now AI agents will start doing that. And then the final category that's the most exciting is AI will be able to do things that we were not able to do because it'll have original insights that don't exist in the human corpus of knowledge. And that's the area of AI that I think is the most underhyped.
G2, we got to leave it there. Your crew is about to come on set and pull you away to go and do.
I just want you to know I have a companion and sidekick,
yes.
But I'm ready for my AI companion and sidekick.
Thank you so much for both of you,
President and Chief Product Officer at Cisco here at Cisco Live 2025.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.